Michael, can you hear us? Okay, that's great to know. So,
all right.
If you have a question, do we have chat? You could pick, Douglas will, if you want to type in something, you could do that. Couldn't you, Doug? Pick up something from chat? Is there a chat too? Right. Okay. If he has a pressing question or comment, hopefully we could translate it into something the group can focus attention on, because I would like to get everyone contributing here. Okay, we're ready to go. Marco will join us soon, I hope. Okay.
Find.
Okay, welcome everybody. So we're looking at Davor Löffler's work, and Doug and I had the good fortune to conduct an interview with Davor earlier, and I hope everyone had a chance to see that and perhaps get a chance to read Distributing Potential. I believe that's the name of his essay. I audited a course that he offers at the News Center, and it's about 30 hours, and I was very absorbed in it. And there was a lot of fascinating material. Oh, we got another visitor? Hello? Welcome.
That's me.
Oh, great, Marco. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. So at any rate, I read the article, I watched the 30 hours, I watched some of it again, and he just had so many interesting metaphors, and I used some of them in our group. And I noticed that there was an interesting response. So I wanted to pursue it more deeply, and that's what this event, I hope, is all about, because I'm very interested in other people's responses, and I hope to give some clean feedback, what you like about the interview, or about the article if you read it, what you didn't like, what you want more of. And then I'm hoping that at the end of this discussion today, we will have a better sense about how this could, this theory could apply to our personal explorations. And I just wanted to start off with something that, let me see if I can read this. Earlier, TJ, our taciturn friend TJ, he posted something in the forum after watching the interview and reading the article. And I just want to quote him because I think this is a very good example of very good feedback. In the interview, you kept asking Löffler about the outside, and he, of course, spoke the word with a German accent in which the D sounds to English ears closer to T. That, no doubt, coupled with the late hour, triggered the thought in my mind that his answers were about outsight, the kind of insight one gains on the problems of one's time by making an imaginal leap, as it were, to look at things from above. Moses or Petrarch. Ask Moses or Petrarch what happens when you climb mountains. Such times of transition as we are in today require, and historically speaking usually get sustained, thought along these lines. The outside is not so much or primarily external to the society as produced by the very dilemmas and problems faced. Unless, and this is where modern societies tend to differ from traditional ones, though complacency is far from being anyone's monopoly, there is little concept of the problem as society habitat threatening. So I wanted to respond a little bit to TJ's feedback. I'm quoting here from the New York Times article recently. They, hope I can find this here. They were talking about the New Green Deal, and hold on just a sec. Okay, this is from the New York Times last week. President Trump derided the Green New Deal as high school term paper that got a low mark. Congressional lawmakers mocked it as zany. Even Nancy Pelosi called the proposal a green dream, and some of the party's 2020 candidates are starting to describe it as merely aspirational. Yet, despite this disdain, the goals of the far-reaching plan to tackle climate change and economic inequality are within the realm of technological possibility. Several energy experts and economists said in recent interviews. The subject was given new urgency last year by a high-profile United Nations report that said the Earth was on track to experience food shortages, fatal heat waves, and mass die-offs of the coral reefs by 2040. The report called for staggering changes to the global energy economy. So I think that's some of the background, some of the tensions and stresses. And if you look at the New York Times, I think of it as the ultimate insider paper. All it does is report binaries, but I think it's important to know what their conflict is about right now. So I just wanted to talk about something I believe like a personal exploration, how this affects me personally, having read this and listened to audited the course that Davor offered and reflecting on the interview. I think that I'm quoting from well, let me tell the story first. I remember I worked at a gay organization. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And there was a conflict of interest among some of the groups. There was a lesbian group who wanted to use a conference room for a support group. But they posted on the door a sign that said, "No man-made pussy is allowed." And this caused some controversy because there were transsexuals, of course, who were not allowed to participate. They identified as women, but the lesbian group, a majority of the lesbians, did not see them as a member of their group. So as I was representing an institution which did not allow discrimination of any kind, I and others who were trying to moderate were in a kind of dilemma. And as a gay man, I realized I'm not in a position to speak for or on behalf of others. However, I did mention to the lesbian group, since they had experienced discrimination, they should be able to recognize that there was a conflict of interest with the institution, which would not allow for any group to discriminate against another group because they do not like them. This seems to be exactly what that was the big issue that we were trying to legally challenge the official view with that argument. So I'm just pointing out how, and I'm looking at William Connolly, who recently we studied, and his plea for something like what happened in the gay movement, pluralistic, I think, ensembles he was talking about, how we need more of those, how people from different walks of life, different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions, different classes, different class, all of them can come together to move forward. And I believe that a technique that I learned in the trenches is how to triangulate from the margins. And there's more than one margin. And that, I think, is a big challenge for us. And I believe that this is something that Davor is focusing on attention on. So this is how I'm applying this theory to my own personal exploration, because I believe, this is a belief, that many of us, more and more of us, are feeling like outsiders than insiders. And I believe this could be a wonderful opportunity for the outsiders, and there are many different kinds of outsiders, to create some sort of coherence. And I think this is going to be a very big challenge. I believe some of us are up to this, and some of us obviously are not. They just want to sit back and watch TV and have another beer. So I think we need to balance the kind of passive and active forms of nihilism that William Connolly specifies in his book as real dangers, with the kind of a creative outsider movement, so that we can hopefully address some of these unprecedented complexities as nature and culture are being redefined and our potentials potentially redistributed, as Davor, I believe, outlines a program. So those are my initial responses. And one more thing. I'm reminded of I don't know who gave me this metaphor. I think it was James Lawley, a friend of mine, but he says it's like high noon and they're two gunslingers and they're facing off, getting ready to have a duel. Neither one of them wants to get shot, and neither one of them wants to shoot the other. But there they are facing each other, and one of them slowly pulls out his gun and drops it to the ground. And this is a signal to the other one that there's not going to be a fight. So they both smile, nod to one another, gesture towards the saloon, let's go buy each other a drink. But then from a rooftop, a person with a rifle shouts out, the first person who doesn't fight, I'm going to shoot them. So I believe this is an excellent example of a bind that's becoming a triple bind, because the original bind is being held in place through a relationship outside of the original bind. And I believe as I study and read, gather reports from various sources, I see this as a kind of meta pattern. And I believe, what's the antidote to this? I believe if we can start to triangulate from the margins, we might get a little bit of leverage so that these kinds of dynamics can be dismantled and we can reorganize in much healthier ways. And I believe the future orientation is going to be necessary. And I believe that's what our imaginations are for. Of course, we can use our imaginations very badly, or we can use them in creative ways. So I hope at the end of this conversation today, I'll have a better handle on what I'm trying to describe here as we deal with these paradoxes, dilemmas, conflicts, and impasses in our complex, increasingly complex social worlds. So with that, I'll just open it up to the floor and look forward to your feedback and your responses. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go. Back to your guest's thesis. Is his name David? David?
Davor.
Davor.
Davor Löffler.
I think if I can sum it up, he's saying that we evolve, we being humans or any type of life, from the simple to complex, and we do this basically, especially humans, we're trying to solve problems, but the problems are only ones that are right in front of us. And so we have this brain now, that's bigger and more capable than any other animal in that we can imagine. But we have yet to be able to imagine the consequences of our problem solving for the current problem. In other words, we see a problem and we solve it, but we can't see the unintended consequences down the road that it generates. And so we are at a, one of those, I think he called it inflections, or I may get that from somewhere else. One of those critical points, because we've come upon a technology that solved some problems for some individuals. And the problem but it has created a problem, and that is we are now in a global connected world, which we did not plan. That was it's just a result, and we did not, all our problem solving prior to this current revolution was fairly localized because of communication. But the new thing we've got, this way to communicate instantaneously all over the globe with all different types of people, and that's created a whole bunch of problems that we didn't see coming when this technology, particularly social media, first the internet, but now social media, it's just created this partly the opposite effect of what it was supposed to do. Like when the people, they thought, oh, this is great, everybody will be able to hook up with their friends and their old classmates, and universities will be able to share information, you know, from South Africa to New York, whatever. And that was the way it was back in the onset. But now it's exploded into this thing, so we fragmented out, and people can find like-minded people, but they don't communicate face-to-face, which is a problem. Interpersonal communication in a fixed environment, say in a room, if we were all in a room, our behavior would be somewhat different than it is here, but this is somewhat different than it is just people tapping on keys and with anonymous, they can be anonymous. There's no threat of violence, physical violence, or of course there's no touch. So we're communicating in a way that we did not think was going to happen. Zuckerberg and those people just thought it'd be great, and it's turned out to be not so great. So people are, instead of coming together, they're fragmenting. And we have that seems to be one huge problem. Another huge problem is the medical technology. I don't even know, everybody's familiar with military industrial complex. Now we have sort of a medical industrial complex where drugs that affect the brain, the body, are just becoming so common. So we're losing a lot of good things. So Davos talked about a continuum that we began here, and looking back or from above, as he said, you could see this, you can see how it progresses from the simple to the complex. But I think and I think he was getting at this, we're at an inflection point where we can sort of see where this is going, and it may not be a good place, but what's the solution? And I think John's nibbling at this when he says, well, let's look at things on the margin and see if we can, you know, work from the out, sort of the margins, the marginalized populations, and include them in the power centers, which was the old way of doing things. So how can we figure out this situation where everybody can commute? We've kind of leveled the voice. In other words, used to be just a very few people could disseminate information to the larger populations. And now, theoretically, the tools are here for anyone to reach enormous amounts of people with a good idea or a bad idea. And it seems like we humans focus more on bad ideas than we do good ideas because they're a threat. So we have our history, our biology, and our mental structures from a time, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, but we've progressed into this brave new world, if you will, strange new world. And so we can sort of see, we can see that things could get really dicey. And now, because of our progress, we have the capability of just destroying the friggin' planet, blowing it out of orbit, actually. But the old problems are still here, and the old problems are ones of interpersonal relationships, people talking with one another, Putin and Trump, Putin and Kim Jong-un, the guy from China, Z or something. So these people, they still have the levers of destruction. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was well said. I appreciated especially what you said about communicating without touch and fragmentation. That's a big problem. So please, Ed, Markov, Doug.
I've done it again. Rattled the cage.
Well, you didn't. I know you like to think you did, but you didn't. I'm being particular. I didn't want to talk tonight because I don't get it. I'll be very honest. I don't get Löffler. I have no clue what he really wants or how he thinks he's going to get there. Your description was very nice, Mark. It was very helpful to put this into a framework, except I don't see all of that in his paper, and I don't see how he gets there. And that's the part that disturbed me about it.
I didn't read his paper. I just saw the interview.
Okay, but I didn't get that from the interview either. It was too fragmented for me. There wasn't a red thread for me. If you can take that, John, I would have liked more structure. I would have liked a little more telos in the interview. Because the only thing I knew about Löffler coming into this was the notion of second order culture that John has mentioned a couple of times. And I understand now John's immersed himself in this individual because the notion second order culture doesn't show up in the paper either. And he didn't talk about it in the interview. So it's like I'm looking for my hook for all of this. I didn't find it. I understand that we need to think long, deep, and hard about what we're going to do with ourselves. And I understand that we are in a position due to our let's call them the technological circumstances, just to keep it within in a small field, that has a lot of potential for a lot of things. But anybody can say whatever they want, but not everybody has to listen to everything. And what we find, I believe, is that most people selectively choose what they want to hear. So we do tend more, the cynic in me tells me, we tend more towards the bad things than the good things because they're simply easier to realize, perhaps. That would be, you know, my fundamental approach to this. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that way, but we are at a critical juncture. I think everybody agrees we are at a critical juncture in the history of humanity. But are we there for the reasons that Löffler says we're there? Well, I'm not sure about that. I think it's a truism that we're at this critical juncture. So I'm looking from him for something that helps me understand better why we're at this juncture now, what it means, and what it means for us moving in any direction. I hate to say forward because all of a sudden it sounds, again, like we're going somewhere. And I find his argumentation in the paper to be little more than a very vague incrementalism. Yeah, there's a cumulative effect of changes, and at some point things change. Okay, I think we all agree on that. What's the new? Where's the strength of this? Where am I gaining the support? And so when John keeps saying, well, what do we think about the theory? I don't really know what his theory is because he simply stated for me a truism that I think is relatively obvious and that we all have been dealing with in any number of ways over a long series of conversations. So that we particularly know that the six of us that are sitting around this virtual table, if you will, all kind of agree that that's the case. Oops, can you hear me? Am I still there? I just got a message that I was unstable. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
No? You're all frozen. Oh, shit.
Now he's frozen.
I can't hear you. I can hear you.
Did I
hear you,
freeze
Ed.
or
Yeah,
you're
we hear
all
you.
frozen?
Yeah, we're freezing for
You
you,
hear
but
me
you're not
again?
freezing for us.
Well,
Oh, really? Well, I was the only frame on the screen that was moving. I didn't know if I was getting through. So anyhow, that's my point. I'm still not real clear on what his theory is, and so if I could a little more clarity in that regard would be wonderful for me, because I just think he throws a whole lot of words at a very little subject.
okay. Can I
No, please, yeah.
respond to that? You mentioned that you're not clear about what the theory is. You would like more structure. You believe, this is your belief, that
I would have liked more structure in the interview. I would have liked more structure in the interview.
Right. And believe selectively, and this is your belief that we selectively choose what we want to hear. You also mentioned that you have a cynical side. And I want to respond. I did not want to bring this into the cafe. This was actually Doug's idea. He had contacted Löffler, and then he was going to, so we decided to set up this interview, conduct an interview with him. I've spent 30 hours with his course. And I don't think this is the right forum, to tell you the truth, for studying Löffler. It would need a study group, actually. But this is introductory, okay? And I did this against my better judgment, primarily because of you. And I love you, Ed, but you have a very strong cynical side, which inhibits my dreamer. And I think we have fleshed this out quite a bit. That's just my feedback to you. And I know you're a student of Gebser, you're a student of Merlin Donald. And I believe you have consistently brought forward some insights from those particular scholars. I think you've also expressed an interest in Steiner. And we've all been kicking this integral theory around for quite a bit from different perspectives. So I'm hoping that we can create some good feedback for Davor. He can watch this. He can take notes. He can give feedback upon our feedback. Then I believe we can start to move towards something like a second order. Because I believe that we can't do that right now, but we might be able to do it in the near future if we have enough opportunities to flesh out some of our theories. I have been disappointed when we brought on somebody like, who was the one who did the Marion? What was her name? Douglas? You remember her.
Linclair.
Marion. I was extremely disappointed by that one. I felt like we were a dissertation committee, just sat there in silence while she sort of free associated. And I don't think it went anywhere. And I don't think it was her fault. I don't think it was our fault either. And I think, Ed, you probably had studied more of her book than anybody else. I just thought it was premature for this weekly cafe setup. So I'm just sharing with you my misgivings about this. But Doug wanted to do it. So I have gone ahead and made this effort. And I really do appreciate your objections. And I'm listening for the positive intention.
No, John, gotta interrupt you. Sorry, gotta interrupt you. I appreciate greatly what you're doing. I thought it was a great idea. This was one of the best ideas I'd heard in a long time, to walk through something, to come to a cafe, so that exactly the things that you're mentioning could be avoided. That I personally don't get something is my problem. I fully acknowledge that. The only thing that I asked for was a little more clarity about what the man is saying. That's all I asked for. It's not a criticism of anyone. I simply would like, because I feel at a distinct disadvantage sitting here, not understanding what the rest of you apparently understand. It's really that simple. I understand that you probably can't say it in 25 words or less. That's not the point. I would simply like more clarity on what is his theory, because I didn't get it from the interview or from his paper. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Does someone have something different?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Because a lot of this, I read the papers, I watched the interview. I really appreciated that you did the interview with the man that wrote this paper, because it gave me a dimension of reading the paper. But I'm somewhat probably running very close to Ed, this is me. I'm just saying, and I think it actually resonates with your intuition, John, that it was somewhat just outside my edge of understanding. I mean, I got bits and pieces, and I think Ed's point that I can be obsessed with clarity to the point of not honoring that it's okay to be ambiguous, I think, and I think that's the edge that you're actually articulating, John, and when we bring these to these cafes, because it's like, I disagree with both. I disagree with bringing something on that all of us maybe haven't had enough time to taste, to bring into our system, and that's why I kind of am working with both you and Ed that there's not enough clarity, and it probably should be, his work should be done like Bateson's work in a study group, because these cafes for me, um, they enliven my ability to exchange a certain level of okayness for me to engage in. And sometimes I do get the feeling, and it's there's nobody I'm pointing fingers at. I work with that edge of clarity and ambiguity, personally.
Yeah, I hear you, Michael. And who are we as a group that we should read anything together? I mean, I don't know. I have a personal pronoun I, and I draw information from the inside, and I take in information from the outside, and what's inside and what's outside changes from day to day, from hour to hour. And who I affiliate with, who I enter into these intersubjective spaces with, brings forward different dimensions. So I think that's an open-ended question. And I share with you a very deep, I think we're deeply aligned in the area of somatic intelligence and how important it is to register in our somat and our soma, these ambiguities and these, what the hell does that glitch mean? Or where does that glitch that's moving around this area and up into my head and back into my pelvis, what is that all about? And how we can use language and metaphor to give shape to that kind of somatic intelligence and enrich our maps in the process. I think this is my interest, is in tuning into those very subtle areas of our experience. And I share that with you. And yeah, I hope I'm not an advocate for Löffler. I am a sponsor though. I do want to sponsor him and give him the best chance, to open up, I think, a very serious theory into a field, from the field of all possibility. We can do with it as we please. But I hope he will watch this. We can give him good feedback and he can respond to our feedback. And that to me is, if we can do that, and we can, some of us may not like this and think it's a waste of time, but you won't know that it's a waste of time unless you've taken time to figure this out. And then you can look back on it and you can reflect on it. I watched the interview and yeah, I saw some things that I missed, but I would not have known that I missed that unless I had gone through that experience of conducting an interview with Davor, even with my, with tremendous misgivings that this was an appropriate thing to present to the group. So I'm learning a lot from what you are offering now. So I'm taking notes and I'm going to hopefully reorganize my behavior around what I learned today. So thank you very much.
Well, and I just want to say, you bring up the subject of we, and I'm going to state my point of view about that. We all are creating a we in this cafe, in the interaction that we're doing. I can't operate with people that I don't have a sense of we-ness, in the sense that there's a responsiveness of a flow of going back and forth with each other. I've been around many people that there's a we, but there's a we that's unspoken. It's a vibratory, somatic. This we on this cafe, for me, I can't speak for the rest of you, is both somatic and it's full. I'm taking an opportunity not to divide the line between me and this environment. And that includes here, but it includes this space that we're sharing on cyberspace. And the one thing that I like being challenged by all of you. I actually like it. It makes me come alive, so that I'm not just in my somatic and my whole organism is brought to aliveness without needing, I don't feel like I have to protect myself from all of you. Because we've developed a level of communication that we can be who we are. That's the way I feel. And so, and it seems to be that this cafe, part of the underlying operating assumption is, and Marco, you need to correct me, it's an experiment. We're experimenting. And I feel just totally enlivened by each time I come to the cafe and can be with so many different kinds of people. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a few weeks since we heard your voice, so glad to have you back. So I don't mind reading from the prompt that John gave us. I did not deeply reflect on any feedback I could give because I'm not one to give feedback. So if I was to give feedback, this is it here. What I liked about the interview, and I'll provide a little backstory to interacting with Davor. Just happened to follow him on Facebook. He reached out to me through the Messenger on Facebook, which is a surprise. I don't use Messenger. I don't use Facebook. I just was looking for an alternative way to interact with this theory that had been presented on a YouTube video. See if there was maybe something on Facebook I was missing. And he had a genial exchange, a friendly exchange, as if he was a part of this we. I did not know this individual. I did not know Davor, and that led to this interview. Just a friendly exchange, and hey, there's also this guy John who is more of the expert, and we came together, and here we are now talking about coming together, what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it, and what we want more of. So the theory part, the actual bulk of the interview, sometimes theory is just another word that gets in the way of what what I want to have happen, what I see as most meaningful to, and I think Davor would agree that to define yourself by theory or to come off with an expert's eye is not necessarily the case. There's a lot of information out there, so no one is a true expert. So what I like about the interview is that it was literally just all right, let's start recording and talking. John had a background in mind, and here we are, left with this recording. So the bulk of the interview, it clarified what I had read in the English translation of a summary of an 800-page work or 1,600-page work that he's working on. So it's quite dense. There's quite a bit to talk about. And I think Davor did his best to, as he was put on the spot, to come up with a good beginning. He quoted from Hesse, which was very nice, that every beginning is magical. I went back, I just recently read, so this goes with the question, how is it relevant to my personal explorations? So after 20 years, I'm having a midlife sort of contemplation. I'm revisiting authors such as Hess, revisiting, I took a 2.5-hour walk in nature before coming here. It's been too cold to be outside, but I participated in nature, in the real world, applying my own theories on how things, or following along with the wanderer, the lone wolf Hesse, as he, I recently reread his first book, The Wanderer's Mentality, how that ties in with society. But I guess what I took away from all this is that there's a lot to talk about. I haven't read Gebser. This is what I would imagine Gebser would come up with if he was still alive today. There's the juxtaposition or the inclusion of art, of aesthetics, of technology, of psychology, of the various branches attempting to piece it all together. I know Mark at the beginning stated he had a bit of an issue with the anterior futures, or coming from the future in a science fiction-like manner and extracting things for the present. That seems like something straight out of a science fiction book. But when I read through this theory, this English translation, hear it in the interviews, it becomes more of a reality, this becoming aware of the stories of the future or the potential stories of the future. So I'd like to hear more of the various threads that will continue to tie together the central theory, the central idea that we all seem to agree upon, whatever that might be.
Well, it does tie into understanding the notion of time, it seems like. I think it's hard to on a visceral level, it's hard for me to think that there is a future because I'm 65. I know I'm not going to be around for it. So when I think of it in terms of time, physical gut level time and how short my time is here, sometimes that borders on despair of I'll do my best to put forth in this moment from what I learned from this cafe and anybody I read to put forth in the present with others and be hopeful for a future. But the bottom line is I'm not sure I'm going to even know if that future is going to exist. I think that's an underlying tension that when we have these discussions sometimes is I think it's good to entertain these ideas, to freshen up, and it helps me not be so stuck in despair, but there's still this little whisper of despair about, am I going to be around in the future? And in what sense? That's my take on why I come to the cafe, is because I'm trying to work with the whisper of not being here probably in 20 years. Based on my scientific knowledge that both my grandfathers and my father died about 83. So I figure that's genetically, that's when I'm supposed to die. So I'm leaning into that in the best possible sense by coming to these cafes, and these cafes help me. I'm in Portland right now, and it's helped me be with my family and be present to the future that I'm making right now in this present moment, if I can say it that way. So time, I think, is one of the hardest things, the concepts that we've been batting around when we talk about these things.
Thank you, Michael. And Marco, you haven't spoken yet. I hope you will bring in some of your expertise around interior, exterior, internal, external, inside, outside, because I do think, I've been a critic of Wilbur, but I think he does offer some very useful models. And I consider you an expert in this area. So I'm looking forward to what you might come up with. Thank you.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that, because what came to mind, unbeckoned by me, just because it's in my particular field, was Wilbur's theory of evolution, his particular way of looking at evolution, because it is multidimensional. It does include both interiority and exteriority. And although when I say exteriority, in terms of Wilbur's theory of evolution, that's not the same as the exterior in the way that you and Davor were discussing it, which I think there are other ways to maybe discuss, get to that, the exo. But I found this, I did the reading, and I did also listen to the interview that you did with Davor, and I was looking forward to reading his work, just because on the surface of it, it's titillating to me. Like generative time regimes, there's a certain kind of poetry to it that I like, but he also has a theory. I don't think he doesn't. This is substantial, and he, as I began digging into it, I immediately felt that this needed to be studied, not just discussed loosely. Although the opportunity I wouldn't be studying him at all if we didn't have this Café. So this gave the occasion for an acquaintance, becoming acquainted with Davor's thought, and I do think it is. I think he is saying something. I think he is, in a way, and one way we could read him is as an extension or an updating of Gebser, not in a direct way or in a linear way, but as one potential sort of elaboration of themes that Gebser proposed and described, to the best of his ability, and using his erudition and his studies to frame a progression, to frame an unfolding. Because this belongs to me to a certain genre. Wilbur is in the same genre. Gebser's in the genre, even Aurobindo, these kind of ontogenetic accounts of how did the world as we know it come into being? What are the forces or the mechanisms or the processes that are driving it? And moreover, and this is where it gets, I think, interesting, and where really it is appropriate, the Café is an appropriate venue for this, is what is the edge that is yet to be, but that we could discern, intuit, perceive, or in some way get some kind of handle on. And I think Davor's approach is really interesting in that regard, because I think he does, without having the Wilberian integral framework, he does have a kind of implicit integral framework, insofar as he's looking at the conjunction between exterior developments, like technological or techno-economic developments, going from simpler forms, bow and arrow, spear, coin, to more complex forms like global capital markets, nuclear warheads, etc. And he's describing, he's tracing the way in which developments in one context, in a larger context, are taken up and folded into a more complex kind of system. But that's also happening on the interior. So it's happening in terms of our cognitive complexity, or views or understandings of our metaphysics, and of these just can't be reduced, right? It's an interior reality, and they co-evolve. I think that's his meta idea. But many people have that idea in one way or the other. And what I think is interesting to him is the way that the particular story he traces. And there's some concepts that are, I think, novel here that are useful and could be useful if we hone in on them. One of them is this thing about the operational chains, and how from simple processes like creating a spear or bow and arrow, you can get to very complex processes, because you can embed simpler in the more complex. So he has this theory of how machines develop, for example, going from simple machines to compound machines, where you have simple actions that are put in coordination with each other, to then these, I'm not going to remember what he called them, but they're basically kind of information machines or communication machines. So now you have complex machines or compound machines that are interlinked. And how, once you get to that point, then you need an information theory to describe how you coordinate all those different machines. And that's basically, what cybernetics is and what systems science is. And that if you were looking at it from the formal perspective of, oh, now we have all these interconnected machines, how will we need to think in order to operate in that kind of reality? Then I think you start to see like where the power of this kind of thinking might be. Because if we start to look at what the larger kind of scales are that are not being kind of accounted for in our thinking, but are emergent in our technologies, then that can give us different ways to think and to relate to those. So let me try to come to a point or sort of hand it off. What I think he's ultimately saying, and here's kind of my thread, is that we work from the more gross and the simpler to the more subtle and the more complex. So in the kind of large-scale archaeological, anthropological history, we have a Stone Age where we can begin to fashion gross matter into tools. Then we have an Iron Age, and then we go through an axial age, which brings in this sort of symbolic creation of an absolute domain or an eternal domain through kind of the Platonic idea and through our metaphysical systems. And then a modern time. And now he's saying that we're entering this technological age where we're still using modern technologies, but the reality that we have to operate in is no longer local. It's a global planetary reality. And we've been very successful at harnessing these operational chains. So we can create chains all over the globe. We can grow food in one place, sell it in another. We could capitalize it through markets that hedge against losses on a kind of systemic level. But there isn't yet an equilibrium at a planetary scale. We've created kind of these partial and fragmentary equilibriums. And if what we know about life is true, and that life will seek out a kind of homeostasis, then we have to look at, well, at the planetary scale, given that what we know about what we're capable of controlling is beyond what let me put it this way. And this is where it connects to that other, the humiliations. The other essay is that we know now that we don't know how to deal with planetary level issues. And so if we know that, then we can start to kind of turn our attention toward where might or how might those kinds of solutions arise. And it appears that they're not going to arise in like a capitalist system where ownership is concentrated in a very few people, and they're able to kind of manipulate the whole in order to extract maximum wealth and to create this useless surplus. Like that is not, that formally can't work with the actual objective conditions. So we have this multidimensional system that's ecological, it's biological, it's cognitive, and it's planetary, and it's even cosmic. Like that we have to actually take that into account at a certain point. That's already beginning to, we're just tasting that now with these Mars missions and space wars. I mean, this is all expanding. So the larger sphere, is going to require different economics, and it's going to require different kind of culture and different kind of civilization. So if we can see the shape of that, which is very subtle, then that could give us some direction, some sense of direction in which to go. And I guess the very last thing I want to say about that is that if we're going from the grosser to the subtler, and if these operational chains are going from gross operational chains to more subtle operational chains, where we're creating chains that are mental, but then what if we're creating chains that are subtle in different ways, that are not like if we have gone from working with stone to working with fire to working with light and electricity, and we put those into operational chains, then what's subtler than light and electricity? Can we work with subtle energies? Can we work with consciousness? That's where to me it's interesting, because if you follow the theory, it puts you in a space where you start to think about, okay, what are the technologies of aperspectivity? What are the technologies of an integral culture or planetary culture? What does that start to look like? And then I think we can get a little bit ahead of the curve, actually. And maybe anticipate things, and this is the anterior future, anticipate where things are going, where, you know, the modern minds are stuck in figuring out how to make a lot more profit, and we're actually kind of getting ahead of them and thinking about the larger scale. So that's my sense of it, and I appreciate the opportunity. I thought he was going to be here. I thought we'd get a chance. I was a little nervous because I think, you know, I haven't done enough reading. I think
I would never want to bring him here at our current understanding. I think it would have been a waste of his time and a waste of our time. So this to me is like a rehearsal for a possibility that some kind of dialogue can happen. If this is good for the group, and it may not be. So that's my personal dilemma. This is, to me, very premature. I'm not ready for this. I don't think any of us are. And it's not going to come because we're ready for it. You know? And I believe you, I wanted to respond to some of what you've offered, because I think it's very tantalizing, especially about the subtle, the gross, the subtle, the causal. We've had lots of discussions about this in this group. The experience of lucid dreaming, those kind of subtle body experiences. We've done some clean language exercises in this group, working with the subtle. We've done quantum poetics in this group, working with the field of all possibilities and staying centered as individuals in a group. So I think and recently I listened to Sean Hargan's interview last night, which I think you posted, Marco. He talks about exo-studies, which is a study of the outside. And he also emphasizes how we have, some of us in the integral world may have neglected the subtle realms and favoring the causal. Let's just skip the subtle and go straight to the causal, hit the jackpot. And I think he's backtracking a little bit and inviting us to consider that it's much more weird than that. So I'm welcoming that. Also, I just wanted to, if we reverse engineer some of these artifacts, the archaeological evidence I think he presents is extremely interesting, and I believe has a lot to do with what Gebser was doing, and a lot to do with Merlin Donald was doing, with this whole idea of mimesis. But if you just reconstruct, okay, a spear, what had to happen for this spear to happen? What had to happen for this bow and arrow to happen? What had to happen for this trap to happen? And he's offering, I think, very good and compelling evidence that the trap contains the bow and arrow and the spear. The trap contains the whole hunting project. And so you take, okay, how do you start? This is part of the reconstruction that he and this archaeologist worked on together. So someone must have had an idea. So there's a tree. Let's get a branch from that tree. So we need a stone that's sharp enough to cut that branch. So you need a stone to sharpen a stone that's sharp enough to cut that branch. So you got that branch, you have to have a stone that's sharp enough to whittle it down so it's a shape, like that spear. Then you have to get an arrowhead. You have to have a stone to cut another stone to make it so sharp that it can attach to that spear. And you need some glue. You need some glue to attach and so you're working with someone else in a space, a social space. This is before writing, before the alphabet. So there's no one around here to design this, externalize it in a chart, in a flow chart, and distribute it. This is something that has to happen in the group. And this, I believe, is where he's drawing on a lot of different theories here about when you think about Piaget and concrete operational formal. We're going in that direction. And this is not accidental, he says. This is a direction. There is a logic of becoming. So you have that spear, you go out and you catch your prey, you kill your prey in a participatory way with others, and you have to be able to focus your attention exquisitely on your prey. Then you come up with the bow and the arrow, which works like this. And this kind of action, one arm is stabilizing while the string is pulled tight and released. That pattern comes from that previous pattern, which also plays into the next patterning, which is the trap. So this is the same thing as this when that trap goes off. This is abstracted from this. So this is what Davor is doing. And I believe this is very, resonates with me with what Gebser was doing as well. And I believe what many of the thinkers we've been studying are up to. So he goes on and he elaborates even further. But I think I just want to quote him briefly. He's talking about very broad strokes. Currently, this is about our current situation. The structure of economy can only be sketched out in broad strokes, since it will appear as an emergent layer growing out of the abstractions of the currently developed technologies. The impossibility to conceive it is analogous to the impossibility for a human of the axial age to conceive of capital, natural laws, constitution, or progress. So I don't think any of us should expect to have, a structure for this. I think we may have glimpses of it. We may have gut responses. I think we're demonstrating here in our cafes and in our study groups a yearning for these possibilities. I think he mentions also, I'm quoting him again, the emerging post-capitalist economic system can be anticipated. Universal basic income, citizen score systems, decentralized blockchain infrastructures, and the management technologies enveloped in platform capitalism. The public will readapt and re-socialize the management technologies enhanced in the competition between the companies exploiting the niches in virtual spaces. He calls it institutional accelerationism. We're already doing this here. We've had meetings around this stuff. So we're already doing this. And this is all Davor is doing, is offering. He says, the second order culture, we're already doing it. We just need to be aware that this is what we're doing. So sorry for that long digression. I hope some of it made sense. And if people are puzzled and confused, I would be really shocked if they were not puzzled and confused. I certainly am one of the perplexed here. So thank you.
John, I want to ask in terms of what you just described, which I can see how you described it, but as you were describing it, I was feeling into, well, what's the need to build an arrow? What's the need to, basically it comes down to the raw energy of a need to protect one's tribe, one's life, and be in the environment. And this has just been, just accelerated in terms, this need to protect has served some bad things, but it also, the need for protect to stay alive has created these awesome other things. But sometimes I think when we consider how these two have, that intersection of the two was founded on trying to protect life. And some groups will say, well, my group is more important to protect than your group. And my understanding, and it's a superficial layman's understanding of integral, is we really have to broaden our touching of this need to protect. This need to grow, we have to protect each other. We have to protect people that are are marginalized, you know? And part of the thing, I wish that would be part of the discussion, along with all these, the need for the bow and arrow. And I know this from my firsthand experience, was because I had to protect myself. But I had to develop an ethic. I'm going to protect myself. How am I going to protect myself? If I'm going to protect myself with raw aggression, or am I going to be, pardon the expression, a Bruce Lee or a Ninja Warrior and do subtle things that I don't need to kill somebody. I can protect myself without going crazy, you know, because in my interactions with people, that need to protect and not understanding how do I protect myself, and working with a bow and arrow or different mechanism trap to protect myself, rather than it just it boggles my mind and my gut that people keep trying to develop these overcomplicated mental constructs instead of really owning this need to protect. Sorry, just.
I think actually, I don't want to take a long time, and I saw Mark shaking his head a bit, so he might have something, but I think that that's a really great point, because, and it connects to another thinker we've read, another German thinker who I'm assuming Davor would be familiar with, Peter Sloterdijk. His thesis is that we have these spheres, and spheres are his way of talking about the systems and interior systems, like symbolic systems, personal, interpersonal systems that provide that protection from the outside. The outside is that which is not, you know, part of my circle of concern, my sphere of concern, my sphere of, and there's always an outside. Every inside has an outside. So there's always a threat, and a social system or a group or a organ, you know, whatever, human or non-human, is creating these spheres of protection in order to allow the life that's inside of it to flourish. And, you know, that's from the mother and child all the way to a global civilization, has an inside and an outside, and those inside are afforded certain protections, and if you're outside, you're not, and the outside is a threat that we have to protect ourselves from. So even climate change is kind of on that level. It's something that is, even though we're generating it, we're at cause, partially anyway, but it's creating this threat that now is forcing a reorganization of how we define what is inside and outside, and how we manage the membrane between the two. So I think that that's really important. And what you're highlighting is the need, the life need, like the motivation. Why do we need to, you know, have these you know, time regimes, or why do we need to have these operational chains? It's all this, it's to serve a life purpose. And so you're saying we're not owning that, and we're overcompensating through creating, through aggression, or build a wall, or whatever it is. But if we were to own our own mortality and our own limitation, then we would create different time regimes, and we would create different external structures.
Thank you, Marco. I'd like to respond to that and to what Michael offered earlier about defense and the desire to protect, and the marginalized, and having to protect and wanting to protect the marginalized. I think Michael was saying. I'm making a big claim here. I believe we are all marginalized people. We're all becoming outsiders very quickly. I would say just look at the US Congress, if you need an example. These people are from Mars as far as I'm concerned. They seem to be not paying any attention to what I think is what's really important. And I think these are manufactured theatrical events, basically distractions. And that's why I think it's important to triangulate from the margins, accept that marginalization as an opportunity. I believe I'm the only person here who has no children. I'm 65 years old. I work really hard trying to figure this shit out. All of you who have children, they may be your biological children, or they may have been adopted. I feel like they're my children. And that may sound very weird to you, but I'm living every day in every way for their benefit in the very small, teeny tiny ways that I can. And I think I'm serving myself too, because I think I have to get more smart. The more intelligent I become, the better it is for everybody. And it's really, really hard because I'm really up against it. So that's why I'm using that anterior future. And we're the past of that anterior future. And we can, I believe, on our best days, that's what our visions are all about. Our ecstatic unions, perhaps. Our gut responses, turn left rather than turn right. Or that book that falls from the shelf, which happened to me very recently after I had a dream about an author named Star. A woman named Star in a dream. The next day I saw a book written by a person named Star, and I bought the book, and it's been very transformational reading for me. So I'm just putting this out there, that it's not about life or death. It's about embracing life and death.
Yes. Yes.
Death is the mother of beauty. You know, we can't have beauty without death. And I'm okay with that. And that doesn't stop me from doing the best I can each day. Yeah, I could wallow in self-pity, and sometimes I do. But I get over it. And I move forward, and I try to find alliances with others who are motivated as well. Just because it's so much more interesting than sitting on my pity pot and whining about how life sucks. Thank you.
Mark, unmute yourself. Unmute.
Unmute, Mark. Mark, you're muted.
Okay. Okay, but I didn't mute myself. Somebody else did. I never mute myself. which my psych girl is trying to, suggest that perhaps I ought to mute myself from time to time. So I got on, yeah, I went down a rabbit hole there. Shit. I don't disagree with much of what you say, John and Mike, with all of you. So I'm going to start at one place and maybe get back to what I just forgot because I'm old and shit. I think what we're doing here in the cafe is part of Davor's argument. And part of it is we all come from different places. We have different background knowledge. Like I think Ed, if I get what I got from you, you come from like an engineering construct. In other words, let me see, prove it, I want some concrete evidence. John comes from a perspective, and he just articulated it, that 5 of us come from a different place. He doesn't have children. We do. That determines the interior of how you look at things. Wherever we are in our life trajectory, situation, like Michael's starting to think about, death. we've talked about death, and if that isn't, that's a universal thing, and some of us are more skeptical than others. Marco, we should do a whole cafe on cosmic time. He wants to live in cosmic time. Michael's living in real time. In other words, he's going, hey, I only got maybe, 15 years left. Me, I know I'm playing with other people's money. I've outlived all my heroes, biologically, I'm playing with other people's money. Yeah, I forgot what, and that's part of it. I watched my father's mind disintegrate, and I think mine's going there, but part of where we as a species is going is that people are starting to manipulate the natural process of life and death. And we can see that, some of us, we can see that on the horizon. And it's coming way faster than anybody ever thought. We've kind of, I think the expression is jump the shark. And Ed, you may say, Gebster, this is a mutation that we didn't anticipate. That's that AI shit. And it is dangerous. We can do things to the biological natural process. And I'm not saying that's great, but that's the way it is. That's the way it is. We are biological creatures, but we're moving towards, and I can't even say inching, we're hurtling towards at a rapid speed, something that we did not anticipate, we did not predict, we did not intentionally design, but we're headed there. And one thing, people, Michael, John, you've talked about this evolutionary process. The process was to feed ourselves, not protect ourselves. At first humans threw stones, and those who could kill an animal via throwing a stone, they produced more offspring. And you can see the apex of that in Tom Brady, the football player. So we, at some point, and Davos was talking about this, the brain developed from 460 cc's to its now 13, and way back to Gidley. She does, and Wilbur doesn't understand this. Most people do not understand how biology and evolution works. But we've jumped the shark, and that's what Davos is trying to get at, I think, is we're at a place that it's crazy. We're headed into Crazyville. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to respond to that because I think you're onto something. And I'm just pointing out something in his text. And he talks about early systems theory, cybernetics, the beginning of artificial intelligence. And he's talking about a passive informationalism. I think you brought up this too, Marco, how information systems are it's like beyond compound machines. It's now we're dealing with different kinds of information are coming in based upon different kinds of procedures and algorithms. So we're moving from a passive informationalism, which was like early cybernetics, where there was feedback loops, homeostasis, self-organization, into active informationalism, which is, I think, in the last 10 years, this has started to happen. And he uses an example of a beetle They now have gone in, they've created a beetle, had 2 eyes, it now has 3 eyes, a 3-eyed beetle. This is something new in evolution. Evolution would never produce this. This is something that, because of our active informational capacity, we're able to enter into a system and intervene and interact with it in ways that we were not able to do 50, 60 years ago. So this can have a chilling effect. I think it's kind of gross to have a 3-eyed beetle. And I don't know what it's going to do to the environment if they let it out of the laboratory where they produced it. But I think this is going to have impacts in the area of what biogenetics, preemptive politics, predictive policing. I'm reading a list he's made. Automated speculative markets, derivative trading, and a whole lot more. So I don't think we're going to be able to turn back the clock in any kind of retro-romantic way. I believe we're going to have to deal with these new developments. But the good news is that the old class struggle with, you know, those elites who are on the top, who are calling all the shots, who are making all the profits, and those workers who were exploited in order for that to happen, that kind of structure, because of this active informationalism, is falling apart. It's very, very hard. It's much, much harder to protect your patents now than ever before. And I think we're seeing a lot of the clash. There are a lot of people who are, you know, want to keep this class war going for as long as they can. But I think Davor is sort of making the statement that if there's no need for cashiers and bank tellers, and you know, manufacturing, if all of that's going to be automated, there's really no need for the CEOs either. So the CEO is just filling a slot in the matrix. So I think that's what we're up against right now, is we're seeing all of these institutions, and some of the institutions have instituted racism, sexism, and homophobia. Let's be honest about that. But they're breaking apart. And I think that that's what he's pointing to. And I think there's a lot of compelling evidence for it. And that, I think, is the hopeful message. But it's not like the old Marxism, where the class struggles and the fights over the means of production. I think it's a different kind of struggle. And I think this is what Davor is trying to bring to our attention.
Now, I think at the end of your conversation, he challenged that, John, in that he said, okay, everybody, all these marginalized factions are making noise now, but they don't have any means of implementing or power, that the power structure that is still is in control.
And I think he's making the claim that that is breaking up. That's what Brexit is. That's why we have Trump in office right now. There's the U.S. Congress is at a stalemate. We're hearing new voices like Octavia Cortez. I know you don't necessarily like her, but she's presenting a Green New Deal, and it's on the front page of the New York Times. Some people are taking it seriously.
Yeah, but what he's saying is, at this I think, if I understood him, that this is just noise, because the old structures, the old power structures, and I think the best example of what he was getting at is religion. And we can go back to Nietzsche and existentialism. When he first declared God is dead, and here we are, what, 150 years? I don't know how long later, several generations later, and yet the majority of humanity still clings to the idea of a creator, even though we've had all these revolutions. And that's the old structure he was talking about that will not relinquish power. Like we have the Catholic Church and the Pope and those costumes and stuff. I mean, what is that? What is that? But they will cling to power. And the majority of people accept that. Because it provides, it satisfies, and I said this a long time ago, it satisfies a need for comfort and order and to progress, or we're now at this threshold. I mean, what the hell is going to happen? And I don't see it being resolved. I don't think this is an experiment that, because we all come from different backgrounds, although we're all white males, it'd be nice to get some, at least some feminist, some female perspective. We have John, who is different than the other 5 of us, but we don't have a female perspective, and we don't have I'll get in trouble. We lack a lot of perspectives, and even the 6 of us, all white privileged males, we can't friggin' agree. So,
but Mark, wait a minute. This notion that you have of evolution is totally different than me. I understand the simplicity that you painted, but I don't reduce evolution to just what your understanding is, because I think we're living at a threshold with evolution that there is something evolving. I don't know what. I don't have to know what.
Wait. There's cultural evolution, which is what Davos was talking about. There's biological evolution, and they're different. They're very, very different.
Different doesn't mean they're separate. Difference doesn't.
Not.
Okay. Not. My argument is, if we can understand that they're not separate, then they're affecting each other. And evolution, as it's been said, is beautiful, but it's a fucking mess, like watching the birth of my children. But that doesn't mean that there can't be some new things come online. I'm on board with you of feeling the uncertainty of what that is, because I'm where I'm at with my life. But I want to embrace whatever the difference is. We could have more women or color on here, but we are dealing with differences amongst all of us. Me, you, Doug, all of us. Difference is what we have to work with. No matter what shape, color, or whatever, it's difference that evolution is trying to bring forward of how do we work with the differences, the edges of evolution boiling the pot, per se. I want to ask you something, Mark, because it's just been on my freaking mind for a long time. Are you anywhere optimistic about the notion of what evolution can do for humanity?
Can I take just a moment to think about your Yes.
Now tell me about that. Yes. Tell me about that. Yes.
But that is the structure of my interior. In other words, I'm essentially from the continuum pessimism, optimism, I lean towards optimism. I'm a very confident, optimistic person. So, my feeling is that is optimistic. Rationally, I can see this ending very badly for humanity.
If I can say it this way, it feels like a tension. There's tension between feeling.
Yeah, but it's not this. It's this.
Oh, okay. That's fair enough. Okay.
It's on, if you read my book, I hope. And
Yes, I read your
I'm-
book, and I was impressed with it, but I was run through the ringer emotionally.
Of course. On page, I think it's page 118, the illustration of the beautiful woman, beautiful lady in the old hag. Comes
Yeah,
from Germany. Comes from Germany, Ed. It's even from the same perspective, you can see two different things, but only after somebody points it out to you. Your initial response is you see one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but if somebody says, look here,
Mm-hmm.
and you're at the same perspective, but you can see two different things. Now,
Yeah.
I think that illustrates so much of the mind
Mm-hmm.
and the human condition. And
Mm-hmm.
I put that in the book because I think that's where we're at. But, you know, it's baffling to most people. I showed it to very smart people and they only see one. They don't even see the other. And then I have to point it out to them. Look.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, John.
Can I respond?
Sure.
I'm just quoting from this book.
We should quote from me, damn it,
Someday.
when I'm dead.
It's next to impossible, therefore foolish, to try to understand something simply by understanding the master narrative about that thing. Conventional wisdom suggested that the master narrative was provided by those with the most to gain or lose. But she was unconventional. Someone is talking about this theorist. Often the master narrative was dominated by those who had the most to gain, while those who had the most to lose were outside, in the margins. In any case, those outside in the margins saw things, sometimes important things, that those inside could not see. If the observer could establish views from the margins, and ideally from different marginal perspectives, the understanding gained by triangulation would reveal insights that were simply impossible to gain otherwise. So this is why.
I don't disagree with that.
Good. We're making progress.
No, we're not making progress. I've always been there, or at least for the last 20 years of my life.
Well, I'm learning something from you, because I sometimes I am easily triggered by some kind of reports that seem to me to be coming from an insider perspective that is then universalized. And I'm saying, no. It is not universal. There are people who live on the margins who know things that are not known by those who are on the inside, who have the most to gain by the master narrative. And I think this is something that I believe that that diversity can, without integration, is not a great idea. I think the tendency to want to standardize creates a lot of problems. And I just say my own personal experience. I cannot speak on the behalf of another group that I'm not a member of that group. I can identify, I can relate, I can read their poetry and watch their plays. There can be something I can learn from them, but I can't standardize that. And that's where I think we get into trouble.
I agree with you. And Marco and I were having this discussion Friday night. So I'd invite Marco to chime in.
I'm not sure what to chime in on exactly.
Well, let me clarify. In that when we were having dinner, I said, there is no way I can understand what a pregnant woman feels like. I can't do that. I think that's what John was saying, that he comes from a position that I can, the more I understand, the more compassion I have, but I cannot be him. And I cannot be a pregnant woman.
How do you know?
That's okay.
As he disappears.
I'm listening.
It's a different conversation. I can tie this back though to Löffler, because part of what we're talking about is the capacity for virtualization. This is kind of what information allows. It allows you to virtualize a machine. Information tells you how to build the same machine, how to replicate a system without access to the same exact materials. If you have the similar materials, you can replicate a system, whether that's a stone system or a informational system, like the chips, like an avatar. Like we're not, I mean, one of the things I found interesting about his piece here is, you know, we're used to thinking of ourselves as individuals, right? And as kind of rooted in our organism, and that's true. But there's this other aspect of ourself which comes sort of becomes emergent in technological civilization, in networked societies, which is the avatar. So we have these different selves that are enacted through technological means. And
can you define avatar, what you meant when you said that?
it's weird. I don't know. I mean, this is, I'd like to think about it more, but it has something to do with these other sort of potentialities or possibilities of being a self that can get expressed through media. So, and media could be art, media could be conversation, media is, you know, many different forms. So when you say, I don't know what it's like to be somebody else, I think that part of what is happening in this technological age is that because it's a hyper virtualization, like we are able to virtualize what it's like to be other people. Like John was saying, I read your poetry, I watch your play, I watch your movie, I start to form a sense of what it's like. Even though I'm not exactly you, I don't occupy your location in space-time and your particular embodiment, but because the mind is able to virtualize perspectives, it doesn't only have to take the perspective of its individual organism. It can imagine what it's like to be that animal or to be that person and that's what we're doing all the time. But now, because of the internet, we're able to do that on a much wider scale. And I think that there is a way. I mean, I think that that's kind of what we're doing when we communicate.
You can imagine, but you can't feel. In other words, if no matter how it's displayed, wrote, and on the page, or we see it on the big screen or IMAX, there is no way to experience. And this is going to be gross. There's no way to understand what a bullet, hollow point bullet, going through your body is like, unless it happens to you.
Mark, as much as I, on one side, agree with you, I think the power of the imagination doesn't need, just because it's different, doesn't separate me from being able, and then bottom line, this comes from watching my children be born. Bottom line, this comes from feeling. No, imagination helps us to feel the other, but it is different. It is different. And why does different? But why does different have to separate us? Because the way you're talking about it is you constantly want to separate our ability to love other people, to feel their pain. I don't have to know your pain to feel it. This is just insane to me, and this is part of the technological bullshit I don't like. Sorry for my upsetness, but this is, like Marco was saying, it's causing us to be hyper individual parts, not living organisms. Thank you for my soapbox.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate your passion. And in my conversation with Davor, I talked about affective zones. How can we use this technology rather than being manipulated by nefarious forces who are subliminally messaging us? How can we create something different through this technology? And I mentioned affective zones. And he then talked about art and the importance of art. And he acknowledged what I was saying, but he also said, but he also added something that it doesn't scale up. And I think that's important. And I guess if I reflected on that some more, I would say it doesn't need to scale up. It can just stay in this zone. And you and I, we can go off into other zones and come back to this one, and it may have changed. I'm sure it will have changed, you know. And so I think there's a tension there that I want to embrace rather than try to standardize it. And I think that's the risk, that we can use this technology to standardize and further marginalize and distort even more our relationships to one another and to the ecosystems that we depend upon. And I think that, you know, it's a big question mark for me, what happens next. But I do think if we have some sort of direction, that's better than no direction at all. And I've been really adamant about, what do you want to have happen?
I think that's,
What do you want? Because that's going to be what guides us, even though just because you know what you want doesn't mean you're going to get it. But knowing what you want is important. It creates that sense of agency rather than that passive nihilism.
I think that's great, John. And I think that's maybe the crux of the human condition, as that each individual has desire of what they want. And from time to time, a lot of the time, it conflicts with the other. And so, and now we're in this space which we did not, nobody designed that we're all in the same space because of the technology. So everybody's desire is different from the other person. Yeah. And so, and I think Davor was saying, well, this is a crossroads. What are we gonna, how do we figure this out? Because you can't have, and you know, essentially 7 billion different people with different desires all coming together and going, yeah.
That's right.
And figuring everything out. So we're at this crazy point where nobody projected this. Nobody thought it was going to happen. Zuckerberg didn't. The dudes at the Defense Department who invented the internet, was it Al Gore who invented the internet? They didn't anticipate any of this stuff. So here we are, and I say something or I write a book and Michael goes off the fucking deep end. So does so do all everybody I know who's read it or tries to read it goes off the friggin' deep end.
That's because Mark.
That wasn't my intention.
That was because, as far as I was concerned, that was a very relevant, deep book. I read it deeply.
Thank you.
I felt your passion, and my reaction to your passion is my reaction. But I was open to feeling your passion.
Well,
your book was very deep, even though I came to pick and choose what I appreciated about it, but I still loved your passion. That's why I read it.
Well,
Right.
that's why this goes back to art. And we aren't in control of, why would somebody like me write a friggin' book like that? There was it was not done for any reason other than my ethos is writing is thinking. I was trying to figure things out.
And very good. I agree with you. I admire you because I come from a place of speaking is thinking more than writing.
I think we're getting ready to wrap up. Doug, did you want to say something? Did you make a gesture? Oh, because I just want to say something very briefly about dream work and the subtle realms and trance work and altered ways of knowing. I remember many years ago, back in the 90s, I had a dream. It was a lucid dream. I was in some sort of laboratory. There were computers everywhere. And I asked, hello, is anyone here? Silence. And I asked, can someone teach me something? Is there someone who can teach me? And I heard a voice. And it was attached to a male figure in a white lab coat. He says, we can't teach you, but you can teach us. And I went, oh, okay. And he said, look at that light. There was a computer, a flat screen, and there was a blue light. And he said, look at the light. And I did, and a laser shot right into my dream brain, my parabrain. I believe that there's a relationship between that brain and the brain that was physically in bed asleep. And there was a buzz that accompanied this blue light that circulated around my parabrain. And then this guy in the lab coat said, thank you very much. And it was over. But I noted it, and I still felt the buzz for a couple of days. And then I listened to Sean Hargens and Stuart Davis on weird studies, and the growing interest among some integralists who this was taboo 20 years ago. Integralists were not talking about UFOs. I wish they had been. I would have felt so much more relaxed. But now I think they are, and they're bringing forward some actual first-person accounts, and I think they're very interesting. What I find interesting is something that someone, I think he worked for the CIA, the Pentagon, but they report that they've had contact, and that there's material evidence for this, there's subtle evidence for it, and there's some of it hasn't materialized at all. And I believe that someone said that in one of these accounts, the message was given that they have a technology that they can give us, but they can't give it to us unless we take it from them. And that they are from our future. They fucked up and they failed, but they are coming back to deliver some useful information if we can take it from them. So these are kind of trickster figures. And I think that they can materialize, but they don't have to. They can leave a physical trace, but they don't have to. They can communicate in very subtle ranges of our experience, because I think we are multidimensional beings. And this, I think, is what Sean Hargens was bringing forward. And I believe what Stuart Davis is bringing forward. And if we had I think if we start coming out of the closet and admit that we do have these experiences, they are taboo, we don't talk about them in academia, I think that we could start to study them in different ways, and perhaps there could be something useful. Anyway, I'm just bringing that forward because I know we're getting ready to wrap up, and I just want to thank once again Davor for the interview and for, I think, a marvelous paper. And I hope when he watches this if he does watch this, I welcome his feedback on our feedback, and thank all of you also for your comments here today. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, John, of the interview and the background for the paper too. I appreciate it.
I'd like you all to go to my Facebook page and scroll down to see my son's thing. He has to get pre-orders, 750 pre-orders to publish his book. And if you want this continuation, I can't read his book until it gets published. So, you know, sign up. Public.
Right
so
on.
We can all read. So we can all read his book.
What's the title of his book? What's the title of his book?
Training to Be Myself.
Oh wow, interesting. Interesting title.
Yep.
You mean you didn't teach him when he was growing up? You didn't teach him? You didn't teach him when he was growing up?
I did. That's why. That's why.
I think you probably trained him well.
He's my best student.
I would love to hear from Ed before we close. And I think there's other conversations to be had because the EXO is very fascinating. I think it's only hinted at here in Davor's paper, but I think the potential for exploring what might really be going on from this perspective of the anterior future that he talks about. Is there a relation between the anterior future and the EXO? I think is interesting. Time regimes, and you know, we didn't talk about that much, but the cyclical, oscillatory, absolute, eschatological, linear progressive, and then the operationalization of processes of becoming, which we've talked about in terms of bioengineering and genetic engineering and so forth. But I think it's subtler than that if you look at it on the cultural layer. So I think there's a lot more to talk about here, and I really appreciate just starting the conversation. Thank you, John and Doug, as well, and to be continued. Thank you.
Really have nothing to add other than to thank those of you who contributed to a little more clarity to what Davor was talking about. I didn't get it when I saw it or read it. And that has to be allowed, that some of us take longer to grasp things than others. It's no affront to anyone when we don't. Now, having said all that, my hope had been for this to be more interested in what's going on. I would love to have a talk with Davor. There's no doubt about it. But I'm not willing to wade through his prose to get there. I don't have the time to do that. I'll be perfectly honest with it. There's too much, there's too many words for too little sense coming across. I think he's a wonderful person. This is what came across for me in the interview. He's a wonderful person who's trying extremely hard to get a grip on the reality that he's confronted with. And I can't express enough admiration for that, because he's trying damn hard to do that. He's got a whole lot in his head. That's also very clear, and he said that more than once in the interview. It's hard for him to get his head around what it is that he's trying to say. I have a great appreciation for that as well, a huge appreciation for that. And just because I don't get it doesn't mean squat in the grand scheme of things. I just don't get it. So there are things I'd love to talk about, and there's things I'd love to listen to. This was we'll go back, the analogy for me, since he's also German, is Sloterdijk. I think Sloterdijk's full of shit. You guys all love him. And I can get a lot out of your enthusiasm for him. But I don't see that he's bringing it there. I love you guys' enthusiasm, or where I come from, Jens's enthusiasm about this. Because I don't think he has anything to say at all. So we can have different views on how this is. And this is not an affront to you folks that you're like deluding yourselves into thinking there's something there that isn't. No, you obviously see something there that I don't see. I'll come back to the Gestalt image, the optical illusion that Mark pointed to. Some people don't see it even when you show them. Why is it? Are they mentally defective? No, they don't see it. They don't see it for whatever reasons they don't see it. That's also part of this human condition that we find ourselves in. I think that's perfectly normal. I don't think there's anything odd about the fact that some people may not see certain things. I found it interesting that Mark said that I come from an engineering perspective kind of thing. I worked in engineering for 15 years. I'm not an engineer. I never took an engineering course in my life. And I worked in engineering for 15 years. I was a project manager in engineering in Silicon Valley, of all places. So, and it just goes to show you can do a lot of things if you put your mind to it. I don't know what mind that was. But I do like to find linkages between things. And sometimes the gaps are bigger than I can spring over. When you talk about an internal logic, and Davor does that in his book, he talks, and this is why I would like to talk to him about it. When you talk about an internal logic, but there are huge leaps that you have to make to get there, then I'm asking, well, where's the logic there? That's all I'm asking. These are just questions that I have. And I think that we have to just understand that not all of us are the same. And I enjoy your enjoyment of these things, but it's not my thing. Okay, so I may not be in a study group. I may listen to one of these, one of your tapes. I may not. You know, it's not like this is high priority. I was curious, what is actually the theory? I have a little better idea after our talk tonight, so that was very productive. Great.
Thank you, Ed. And I'll be honest with you, your response has not surprised me at all. You've responded the way I expected you to, and that's fine. I tend to be on the visionary side of the spectrum. I can be a realist. I can certainly be a critic. And I believe that those are very important functions.
Side of the spectrum. Are you making an assumption about where I might be?
Well, because when I was a child, and I've talked about this before, when I was about 12 years old, I knew that I was not like everybody else. I went to the library and I read up on homosexuality. It said I was doomed to a loveless life of alcohol and drugs. And I read Freud, I read all the sociologists, and I said basically, fuck you, I'm gonna do it my way. And I used my imagination. There was nothing in my environment at all to support that. But I came to New York and I found a group, very like-minded. They came from all different walks of life, different classes, different ethnicities, different religions. We had something in common. We bonded. We organized. We shaped events. We broke the law. We changed the law. And so I'm drawing upon that very personal experience, but it happened because I was able to blend first person, second person, third person. And that's why I'm here. With the expectation that there may be people who are invisible. This is invisible work. This is anticipatory work. There's a lot going on in the world that is invisible, that I believe we need to pay attention to. And I believe Davor is saying there's a new materialisms, new metaphysics, and new subjectivities that are emerging right now as we speak. And that's what I want to align myself with. And I don't want to waste time, other people's precious time, Ed's precious time. I don't want to waste it. I want to use this cafe for something that's of use and delight to him, not just tolerating other people's interests. So I believe I only want to bring to the group what I think is good for the group, and that may change. This was I think too much too soon, to tell you the truth. I'm not ready for this. I don't think anybody was. And I just want to once again say this is an experimental space and it's a safe to fail space. So even if we fail and fall flat on our face, it's perfectly safe to do that here. So that's what I'm learning from this event.
No?
This
Well,
discourse.
okay, John. I didn't see anybody fall on their face tonight, but then I don't see a lot of things that other people are seeing, obviously. So
That's why we need.
for the pretty woman and the old hag. I think I saw the old hag first, by the way.
That's why we need everybody here. Exactly, because, how shall I say this? Evolution is taking place at this moment for all of us on some level. And I'm glad to be part of the party. So, anyway.
Thank you all very much. I have to go.
Thank
I'll
you,
see y'all
John.
next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
You have any last words, Doug, before we go?
Yeah,
You
I
haven't had a
have
chance
plenty.
to say much. I have to go really soon too,
but,
but I want to make sure we give you a chance.
I could tell you the yam story, the new myth that I'm sharing with my children. But I'll spare you that. I think I can save everything else for a future conversation. So it's been a pleasure listening to everyone.
All right. All right.
Okay, I have something for Doug. Write that friggin' review. I need a count. I need a
Oh, it's
counterpoint.
already written. It's already written. That's the whole point.
Well,
it's not
put it
worth
out.
reading. That's the whole
Put
point.
it out
too.
there, man. Put it out there.
Excellent.
And I think
You-
Ed would get
You
it.
too,
I think
Mike,
Ed,
although
I think Ed, I think you would get it if we walked through it paragraph by paragraph, because I think there is, there is an argument here. I mean, I don't think it's there, and there is a logic here as well. I think.
Well, this is the fundamental problem that I have, if it's a problem at all. I agree with you. If we would go through this paragraph by paragraph, talk about it, a lot would come out of this. I don't argue that at all. Like I said, Davor himself is a very sympathetic person. I think he's one of these people that's well-intended, that is trying to avoid the Rodale. That's at least where I would place him on Mark's spectrum. But anyway, I agree that there's a lot there. There are holes in this because he's trying to condense whatever his 1,600 pages of thesis is into 35 pages. And he says right at the beginning, it's a précis. And a précis is simply taking a sentence here and there and piecing it together. And so what he's saying here, I am convinced, just because of the nature of the text itself, is not what he's saying. That's my assumption number one. He thinks this is what he's saying. And this is a good attempt at him to say what he's saying. But I'd like to see, for example, Mark put his book into 10 pages so that it comes across with the same effect. And I think he would agree, because I think this is the case with all such attempts. You have to fail. It took you 1,600 pages to say it. Or it took you 250 pages to say it, or it took you whatever number of pages. It took Gapser 364 or 500 pages in the translation, whatever, you see. That's the space that you've allotted to yourself. Now, there is a lot of air in here as well. This is, every text that I've ever encountered is like a croissant. You have to chew it up and spit out all the air so that you find out what it is that's actually in there. Because we don't have any other way to do it. We can't bake croissants without air. And they wouldn't be croissants if we did. They would just be maybe old bread. And we have a whole different feeling about those than we do about croissants. So we're confronted with a problem. Davor is, I will express a prejudice that I have, even though I live in this country. Modern German philosophers are full of words, not necessarily full of a lot of content. They need to work real hard at thinking through what they have to say so that they can say it without you having to read the whole thing to understand what they're saying. If you will recall, my biggest beef with Sloterdijk is that he repeatedly said, once you've read all 3 volumes, you'll know what I'm talking about now. No. Tell me now what you're talking about. There's no reason why you can't. Say it now. Don't make me read it all. And when you look through this little paper at how many times he references his complete work, go there for more detail. Well, that's not even there to go to for more detail right now. I'm left with those holes because he can't put them in here. There's no way that he can. He actually needs to write a different text here. So he's in a dilemma that he can't get out of. I'm in a dilemma I can't get out of. And having 2 dilemmas bump up against each other isn't always the most fruitful environment for having something positive come out of this. And like I said, most German philosophers today, they've always been long-winded. You know, think about some German philosopher who wrote a short text. yeah, it doesn't happen. It just not, it's not there.
Wittgenstein.
So, huh?
Wittgenstein.
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 He did write a short text.
Oh, Mr. Apple. Yeah.
The world is all that is the case.
Yeah, I know. Okay, all right. Yeah, okay. When I was on my
he's the exception that proves the rule, perhaps. Let's just.
Yeah, I know. I had a Wittgenstein weekend here a couple of months back. Okay, he wrote short ones, but he wrote the most ambiguous of all the texts. So they're probably the biggest ones.
Well,
when you get right down. See, it's one of the things, like, I'll put it down in a few words, but I just leave so much open that we're all going to sit here and gnaw on it. This is a croissant. This is a croissant that really has a lot of air in it because you got to chew a lot to get the substance. So anyhow, so we have a lot of words and not necessarily a lot's being said. It's a problem of trying. It's a problem of trying to be exact. And it's a problem of trying to be specific. We're not real specific. Our language isn't real specific. We're very ambiguous in our language. So when you try to nail it down, we always miss it. This is why after a gazillion, if we take after 70,000 years of human cultural capacity, we'll use his framework. Why is that which still endures after all of this time poetry? Which is actually the least number of words for the greatest effect. Why disintegrated prose.
Yeah, shoot.
One way to see it. That's also worth a discussion. Or is prose that attempt to say what we should be getting otherwise? Yeah.
Thus we have sex.
All right, I'm out of here.
Okay, that's one possible solution, but it may not be. But at any rate, that's where I found myself in the dilemma that I'm trying to come with, and so I had to overcome a certain amount of prejudice against the writer, not the person. The person was one. That's why he'd be great to sit down, have a beer with, and a talk.
There you go.
I'm not sure I want to read 1,600 pages to figure out what it is he's saying. That's my dilemma, if you will. Okay, so
and
said that,
and that's the truth.
That's the truth.
Well, I think that's what makes poetry so hard. Is that
I agree with you 100%, Marco. That is what makes it so hard.
What the fuck is he saying?
Right, but you don't have to read 1,600 pages because you can chew on that one page, that one verse, that one line, and it's there.
No, that's
really what I think is the benefit. I mean, that's the leverage that poetic expression gives.
No, I like poetry in real time. The dude or dudess, open mic.
Yeah.
So you get the full experience of the, you know, the full experience, the gestalt.
Yeah, which is, excuse me, which is a different kind of poetry. I mean, there's various kinds of poetry, well, types of poetry, and that's one, and it's a very special one. I agree with you 100%. That's why when Marco performs a poem, it's a lot different than when I sit down and read that text.
Yes.
It's a whole different ballgame. Now,
Yeah.
each one is valid in its own context. And part of the recipients, the person that's doing the reception of this, his job, I think, or her job or their job is in the end to integrate where's the overlap, because in the overlap between the two experiences will probably get truth closer to whatever truth it is that the poet is trying to express. Because we have two modes of the same quote unquote same thing. It's not really the same thing, but it's the same thing. Because in the one is just the record thereof. But it so it becomes something in its own right as well. But it's a whole different,
Another conversation.
And that's
But
another kind of
Yeah.
sex. That's another kind of sex too.
well, that's an analogy that one can use to describe some of these things.
Well, that was the point of this other paper on the
How
nature of
many
cultures.
sexual positions are there?
Infinite.
Well,
Infinite. I mean,
well, Mark, I hate to say this, but I've been intimate with you on this Skyping. So there's intimacy taking place.
Takes a lot of different forms,
all right,
guys.
get a room, guys. Get a room.
All right.
I'll see you
have a good
later.
day. Enjoy yourselves.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye now.
guys. Bye bye.